that a pre-modern or pre-colonial Assamese literature before, we all know how with the coming of print in the 19th century, how literature becomes standardized, how the whole aspect of textuality, how the idea of otha and the subjects that were explored within literature became standardized from the 19th century onwards with the onset of print, and also with a greater consciousness around language and linguistic identity. But I shall be talking about a period prior to the 19th century, and when the ideas of language, the ideas of literature were highly fluid, right? And also the subjects that were explored within literature were very expansive. They were not limited by geographical constraints, right? So, and also the themes that were explored within literature were, they had intersections with multiple other ideas, because at that point of time, as it happened after 19th century, that certain disciplines were conceptualized. Now we have like disciplines like like anthropology, sociology, so these disciplines were standardized post the 19th century as disciplines which carried forward colonial knowledge, and also they became disciplines, academic disciplines at a later stage. But in the pre-19th century, the ideas were there, the concepts were there, but they hadn't become very well regimented disciplines at that point of time. There were discursive areas. I mean, there were discourses, there were agreements, there were discussions, arguments over these different areas, and they formed a larger culture of interaction, which involves literature, culture, religion, and various other means. So, right now, none of us, I mean, he lived almost 500 years ago, right? I mean, but the aura that he created, the aura that he emanated had stayed with us. How? We haven't met that person. None of us have seen him, right? But his creations, the Borgids, the Kirtans, whatever, or the Ankyanaths. So these are traces, these are remnants, these are embodiments of his persona which have stayed for so long, and they continue to inspire us. So what literary culture, per se, I shouldn't be using the word literature, but pre-colonial Assamese literary culture, we find there were three important religious traditions. There were more, but I'm talking about three important religious traditions in pre-colonial Assamese literary culture. One was, we all know about Hankordev, we know about Neo-Vaishnavism, we know about how Neo-Vaishnavism ushered in a new movement in 15th and 16th centuries. We know about how with Borgids and Kirtan, with all the Guhas, how it initiated a new conception of society, of individual identity, right? But we must also remember that Assam was known since ages as a heartland of Tantra, a heartland of Shakti, right? And along with Shakti, there was also another tradition called Shaivism. So in Assam, we find, and that's why Assam is so unique. In Assam, we find the confluence and interaction of three religious traditions: Vaishnavism, Shaktaism, and Shaivism, right? And they are all equally vibrant. We see even now we the 10th century. I'm talking about the Kalika Puran. Now around the 10th century, Kalika Puran was in Sanskrit, right? So when we talk about Sanskrit, I'm talking about a elite Brahmanical culture. All right. Now, for example, Kalika Puran was composed in Sanskrit. Now, it is evident that only the Brahmins could read it. Nobody else could have read Sanskrit at point of time, right? Or Brahmins could have read it or could have memorized it. But at the same time, within Assam, we find, not specifically within Assam, but the larger context of Eastern Assam, from the 9th to the 12th century, we find the prevalence of a tradition called the tradition of the Charjapads, the Sajjapads. And Sajjapad is a literary form, a literary genre, which is common not only to Assam, but Assamese, Bengali, Maithili, right? Many languages, Nepali, many languages. Actually, this is a form of proto-literary form because Kamrup at that point of time was a large kingdom which touched parts of North Bengal and also extended towards Nepal, touched parts of Nepal. Therefore, Sojapot, now if anyone of us have read Sojapot, we will see that even within Sojapot, we find references to the empowered position of women in the society. Right, even within Sojapot, if we mind it, because Sojapot was composed in a language which is highly esoteric, even though it was composed in a proto-linguistic form of Assamese, or call it Assamese or Bengali or Maithili, but the language is highly esoteric. It was highly symbolic, right? I mean, by this I mean that there's a surface meaning, but there is also a deeper hidden meaning, right? So in Sojjapadas, we often come across the figure of solitary women. There's one. All right, now, in this story of Shan Sodagar and Manasa, we see that Manasa is forcefully seeking the devotion of Shan Sodagar. So it's not that they are the ones who are. They want the devotion of they want their devotee should worship them. They have a more active agency in terms of a god or a goddess, right? And this is a very simple Tokari Gate. Right, but this Tokari Gate is so embedded within this whole energy, this social energy that I'm talking about. So Parvati generates that social energy through the strings, those gunas, and it's that vibration that energizes the whole Tokari, and it is the source of music. It brings the whole ambience, into life. Right, and this is something that Shiva and Parvati, they are doing it together. Right, this is the social energy that I'm talking about. I have given an example from Kalika Puran where Shiva and Kamakhya, they are coming together and they are in union, right? But this was an example from Sanskrit. But here I'm giving an example from the vernacular. You will find many instances like that where they come together and they collaborate and they conjoin to form the whole idea of Shiva and Shakti. Therefore, when when a newly married couple is blessed in Assam, we say Horo Parvati Bhakti Bhav. May you be blessed with Horo. They become a couple like Horo and Parvati. Right. So anyway, I think it's almost spoken for 50 minutes. So I think I should stop here. And
what's the history behind it?
I mean, see, it's similarity, because see, for example, then one could say the same thing about, say, Tamil and Malayalam, right? Like Gujarati and Marathi, right? One could say something similar with Hindi and Punjabi, because these are contiguous languages. These are languages which have grown within neighboring geographical areas, right? So obviously, a language is not grown it doesn't take birth in a single day. It develops. And a language is like a flowing river, right? It grows in tandem with its neighboring sources, with neighboring elements, right? So Assamese, Bengali, Uriya, Maithili, they are neighboring languages, right? So even though these languages, they have their own identities, yet there was constant give and take between these languages. One could say similar thing about English and French, right? One could say same, because if you look at the history of English literature, you could find frequent interaction with French, right? With give and take with French, with Latin, with Greek, with so many languages. So our language is not nourished in isolation. It grows with interaction with other languages. So obviously there's a give and take. And also, there is not one variety of Assamese. There's no one variety of Bengali. There's a standard variety, but then there are dialects. There are other linguistic varieties. For example, the Assamese that we speak in Western Assam is not exactly similar to the Assamese that is spoken in Eastern Assam. The Bengali that is spoken in North Bengal will not be similar to the Bengali that is spoken around Calcutta or the Bengali that is spoken in Bangladesh. Right. So these are different linguistic varieties. So they take the form of they have a local habitation. They take the local color. And if you look at the borderlands of Assam and Bengal, you could find people in whose language you will find snatches of both Assamese and Bengali. Right. And there are people in South India where they could speak Telugu, Kannada, and Marathi. There is this area where like Andhra, Maharashtra, Karnataka, they are like equidistant. So they can speak 3 languages. So I mean, same Marathi people can, many Marathi can speak Gujarati and vice versa. So this is a very dynamic process.
Thank you for the information. Also, I wanted to it's not a question, also an query, but I just wanted to know your thoughts that the way you explained about the Assamese culture and the history, like small details, but those details are also very much necessary. Do you think that the history that we learn in the school time or any in our HS and more, do you think that is I felt, because I have learned history till my 12th, I have seen a very less amount of Northeast history in my history book. Do you think that it's been neglected, or do you think people are just not that curious about it? Something like that.
It's mixture of many reasons. I mean, it's like because history is something which is always formulated. I mean, because history is something we are looking at the past from our present perspective. History is past conceptualized in the present, right? So whose history, what kind of history, it's something, there are many factors which decide, right? With what kind of history you are reading, in what color. There maybe in some histories Akbar may be presented as a very benevolent ruler, whereas in some kind of histories Akbar may be seen as a very a tyrannical ruler, right? In some so I mean, in terms of Northeastern Assam, yes, there have been, because as in my school days, I never read about Assam and Northeast in my history books, right? But I think nowadays the situation is changing, and there are more and more elements are coming within. But I think it's a responsibility. It's an equal responsibility to people like us to sensitize people, because my idea is that I'm using the word mainstream in a very careful way. See, the mainstream may not be bothered about the periphery. You cannot blame the mainstream for that. I would also see this as a responsibility of the periphery to make oneself heard. Right. So I feel it's also, therefore, as I said, I am being a student of English literature. I have dedicated myself to the study of Assamese literature, because if I don't study Assamese literature, who else will? I mean, as an Assamese, I'm saying, right? So it's my responsibility, and also it's my duty to make people who are not Assamese take interest in Assamese literature. Otherwise, they won't be bothered. Right. Any Gujarati or a Marathi won't be bothered to read Assamese literature unless there are any specific reasons behind that. But if I'm making efforts to make them understand, you should read about Shankardeva, make them, take Shankardeva to them, they would obviously be interested. Now that I teach comparative literature, that there is all the more reasons to, study multiple languages, multiple literary works together. So it's our responsibility to, make others listen to us. Rather than blaming them for not listening, we should be the one who should be sort of boxing their ears. Nay, we are there. You should be listening to us. So I see the responsibility, greater responsibility on our part to make ourselves heard.
Because lag behind these days, especially the youngsters, because they're so much interested in knowing the other countries' history other than their own. like not being judgmental, but the truth, because I'm also a youngster and I have known about the culture and the religion, the main things for the first time. So thank you so much for enlightening me with
Pleasure. It's
the
my
knowledge.
pleasure. It's
It
my
was really
pleasure. And I have also learned a lot from the discussion.